The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm Charles Christian, and thank you very much for tuning in again. This week we haven't got one of our big interviews, but instead we're going back to our more traditional magazine format, running a series of features including the returns of Weird Tales' favourite Naomi from Inanna's Festival in Norwich to discuss the traditions associated with the festival of May Eve or Beltane, or even Walpurgis Night. But first, conspiracy theories. So, we've mentioned before some of the wackier conspiracy theories surrounding the current coronavirus pandemic, and here's a new one that's just popped up in the UK. It centres on the newly issued £20 note, which features the 19th century artist J.M.W. Turner in its design. Now, the note was only issued at the end of February, just as the coronavirus was starting to become a serious issue, and some people immediately spotted what they said was a representation of the virus above what they also thought was a 5G telecom tower on the reverse of the note. Now, we're obviously here talking about the very much discredited theory that the spread of the coronavirus is somehow linked to the rollout of 5G technology. Well, it's not. The so-called coronavirus design actually depicts the layout of the rotunda in the Tate Britain Art Gallery, which is the permanent home to many of Turner's paintings, while the 5G phone tower is actually the lighthouse at Margate in Kent. Why Margate in Kent? Because it's close to the Turner Contemporary Art Gallery, also in Margate in Kent. I have to confess I was a little underwhelmed by the Turner Contemporary and had more fun at the recently restored Dreamland Amusement Park in Margate. Clearly I'm a peasant. But back to conspiracy theories. This got me thinking about what are the most common conspiracy theories currently doing the rounds. And I'm indebted here to the market research organisation Opinium, who conducted their survey here in the UK during early April. So we've got some very much up-to-date ideas. Interestingly, Opinium measured not just the number of people who thought a particular conspiracy was true, but also the number who felt confidently it was false and could be ignored. So, here now are our top 10 conspiracy theories. At number 10, Elvis did not die in 1977, but lived on for many years afterwards. At number 9, vaccines cause autism in children. At number 8, the vapour trails or contrails emitted by jet engines contain mysterious chemicals that have been added by government agencies for secret and sinister purposes. At number 7, man-made climate change is a hoax. At number 6, the world is secretly run by a group called the Illuminati. At number 5, the 12 signs of the zodiac, or horoscopes, can be used to accurately predict what kind of day a person will have. At number 4, there is some kind of monster living in Loch Ness, which seems quite reasonable. At number 3, the moon landings in 1969 were faked. At number 2, and this totally threw me as I'd never heard of it before, there's a conspiracy theory that the food poisoning that Ronaldo suffered on the eve of the 1998 World Cup between France and Brazil was secretly arranged by the French government to help France win. Yeah, miss me, but I don't follow sport. I'm not even sure what Ronaldo is. Isn't he the clown at McDonald's? Anyway, and at number 1, with by far the highest percentage of believing it to be true, nearly a quarter, and also the lowest number of people confident it was false, is that President Donald Trump is being blackmailed by the Russian government, who have embarrassing video footage of him or else financial information about him. So there you go, the top 10. And just outside the top 10, with almost equal ratings, are the conspiracy theories that the Earth is not round but actually flat, that 5G is linked to coronavirus, and that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by a lookalike who has betrayed him ever since. Now, as promised earlier, here's Naomi from Inanna's in Norwich to talk about the Beltane festivities and how they can still be celebrated during lockdown. Once again, my great pleasure to be talking to Naomi from Inanna's in Norwich. And again, this is a slightly unusual show, but we're living in lockdown times. But we're going to be talking about May Day, May Eve, Beltane, Walpurgis Night, all manner of things.
Hello, Charles. Once again, we have to do it in the virtual, as you say. We are separated by order of health and well-being, and here we are using the technologies to keep ourselves in touch. Yes, not perhaps the May Eve and Beltane celebrations that people might have previously celebrated, but even though we're confined to barracks, we must find our ways, because it's connecting with the seasons and the cycles and the observance of nature around us, which is continuing as though nothing in nature were changed. In fact, in many places, of course, more animals, more birds, clearer air, and for us, perhaps, more time to notice. How many people have messaged me and said, I've not sat in my garden for a long time, now I am. I've not worked on planting or tidying up in house or garden, now I have some time to do it. And noticing birdsong and noticing blossom and noticing the unfolding of the spring, the unfurling of the leaves. And so while we are having to observe other restrictions, so we may have an opportunity that we didn't have before to utilize. So yes, Beltane or Bealtaine, if you want to be fancy and say it Gaelic style, the festival that falls in between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, the festival that is fire and love and goddess and green man and love and passion and noticing the blossoming of things. It is also a fairy magical night. It's exactly halfway to and from Samhain at the end of October. So this is, again, a fairy magical connection and the thinning of the veil between this and other realms, and offerings made to fairies, milk and cream and something shiny and sparkly and something yellow, perhaps, flowers, are traditions associated with. And livestock were moved out from the winter quarters into the summer pastures. People might even pass livestock through to fires, which was not only a magical symbol of rebirthing and new growth, but also perhaps might get rid of some of the parasites that might be on them as well. So many of the traditions seem to have a health and well-being focus, as well as the more arcane magical symbols. They will relate to real circumstances, burning old winter bedding and cleaning and sorting and refreshing the home out after a long winter of being indoors. Now, light and clarity can be seen inside, and in ancient times people would get rid of winter straw and winter bedding for themselves and for animals. So it is magical and mystical, and practical and proactive. And while perhaps we might have in the past celebrated it with friends and family, at the moment many people are just on their own or with a few other people who they might be getting heartily sick of over the last 4 weeks of being, enforced close quarters. So, yes, thinking of ways to celebrate. You mentioned Walpurgisnacht being another name for May Eve. And that does seem to be, as far as I have found, an ancient European goddess who was then later co-opted, as so often was the case, by the church with a sort of spurious canonization. It seems that she was an English-born woman who
indeed
became an abbess in Germany, but had managed to study medicine. And that's the thing that kind of interests me, is that she is associated with bringing health and well-being in some interesting ways. And as a saint, she seems to have had associations with coughs and colds and whooping cough, and helping to heal. So that's an interesting association, particularly as we're dealing with virus and all the other winter lurgies and flus and ailments that we've always had every winter. And this idea of her being curative and also having the association of an oil, a miraculously curing oil, again, not unusual with many saints to have some product that could be marketed and sold.
Merchandise, as we now call it.
Absolutely. Oil and water associated in ancient times, of course, with life, with nourishment, springs and wells and waterfalls and rivers. But in more recent times, the marketing of saints' oils and saints' waters, and they can be things that have just simply touched perhaps a relic or a statue of said saint. So dispersed that way. But the idea of her being an ancient part of European culture, having such popularity that she still had to be absorbed into the newer tradition. That's an old story, frequently found. But celebrating now, if there are children, and even if not around children, maybe a way to celebrate is to light a little fire, even if it's just in a little bowl with some incense. And even if there's no one else to share it with you. Beltane meant bright fire. And the idea that fire is an ending but also a beginning, that it's a cleanser and purifier but also brings things back to life, as after wildfires, new sprouts do come. So maybe think about the idea of, during this time, what would you like to bring to life? Not necessarily a baby, could be a project, could be an idea, could be a relationship, could be a plan or a dream of some other kind that has been lurking in the depths for a while. Maybe now is the time to think about that leap. People used to leap over Beltane fires. Mm-hmm. So maybe think of that leap of the dormancy of a thought or an idea or a plan, and bringing it to life and giving a little bit of fire thought to that. And of course, this is a time associated with fertility. And as I've said, it doesn't have to be fertility of body. It can be fertility of creative mind. But most certainly, goddess and God coming together, creating life, creating new beginnings, and noticing around us this ability of animals to create new life. There are birds feeding, clearly. Hatchlings I've seen this morning in my own garden, blackbirds dashing back and forth with beaks full of little wriggling some things that they've found. Robins have been dashing back and forth from my bird table again, clearly filling up on whatever good food they can find. And so that thought again of feeding us, whether we can find some good new fresh foods, and also to use up perhaps what we've had lurking in backs of kitchens and cupboards and corners. It's time to use it and enjoy it and decide what to replace. And I know many people are growing fruit and vegetables and working on the idea of having increased self-sufficiency perhaps, but certainly enjoyment of flavour and enjoyment of variety, and imagining how people, having relied so heavily on preserved foods over the winter, having had first milks at Imbolc and new eggs at spring equinox, that now we start to look at the earliest fruits and vegetables coming. And this is a fairy magical association, and so that again can be tied in with feeding ourselves and leaving a gift for fairies somewhere. That has also been part of a tradition. I see a lot of celebs and other notables creating dance and music, sharing it online. That's very much an ancient tradition, that this is a dance and music time as well. So sing some songs, create your own living room disco. If you have a bit of space and it won't intrude on other people's peace and quiet, light a little fire in garden, very small, controlled, safely. Dance around it if you can. It'll give the neighbours something to talk about.
Yes.
Don't have to be sky-clad. Nudity not essential, particularly if overlooked by others. But it's still cool air, but lovely in the sun. Yes. So don't feel that is a requirement. But certainly, if you want to fling caution to the wind and you've got some space to do so, but enjoy maybe watching a sunrise, listening to a dawn chorus. It's getting to the point now that it's not that far beyond one's normal getting up time, and you know it's such a beautiful thing to hear first one bird and then the next and then the next, and how that joining in is a garland that rings around the earth. It circles the earth because everywhere it is dawn breaking somewhere. And ancient goddess Rhiannon, her song is said to be the dawn chorus. And so I like to imagine that, you know, every hour, every minute, somewhere is moving through that dawn time, and that birds will be waking up and singing their early morning song at that point around the globe. So there are many customs and traditions that have kind of filtered down through the ages, and some we can work with, and some are perhaps less practical for us living in small houses with minimal green space around us. But to think about our health and well-being, which we are doing, to think about our effect on nature, and how even just these few weeks of minimal travel and minimal movement have cleared air and enabled wildlife to venture into urban spaces that they did not before, and that we have had time to observe and enjoy. This is the Floralia. This is the Roman goddess of flowers, the goddess Flora. This was her time during the Roman era, and celebrations with flowers and beans and wheat ears from the previous harvest were shown at this time. And of course, this is where we want the land to become most fruitful and vegetation to get started, so that we have food to eat and survival. So with all of those things in mind, and however and wherever people are working with their circumstances, whether people are still very busy working, key working, healthcare, social care, every practical thing in the shops that are open, in the post that is still being delivered, in the bins that are still being emptied, how we have noticed recently the practical, basic needs that we have and who is still taking care of those for us. So thoughts out there to everybody, and wishing in all our different circumstances a blessed Beltane to all.
That was lovely, Naomi, though you've left me with the image of naked people dancing around a bonfire with face masks on, just maintaining their social distancing.
Maintaining social distance, and I sometimes just say to myself, well, if people are looking, they shouldn't. And if they do and it burns their eyes, well, too bad. But, celebrations are celebrations. Maybe more of it. We need to get some vitamin D. We need to get some sun on our skin. So depending on circumstance and how much one dares to bear, if you have got sufficient privacy, even with some, railings, create a little bit of fence privacy around you, even if you have to hang up some towels or jig something together with garden bamboo sticks or what have you. There is nothing lovelier than being able to get skin and sunlight together. It's just one of those primal things, isn't it?
It is.
I've never done sort of river swimming or naked ocean swimming. I've never had the opportunity, but I would if I could, and if it wasn't going to upset anybody. But certainly if one has sufficient privacy in garden or patio or whatever to be able to just get kit off and get sunlight on. I think one of the saddest things over the last few weeks has been the closure of public green spaces, parks, gardens. I know a few people have been absolutely idiotic and totally disregarded recommendations of space, but to close places for those that do not have any access to anywhere green, and it puts far more pressure on the places that are open. So it's not helping, and I would say the best thing for anybody, for all of us, is access to fresh air and sunlight.
Yes.
I mean, if anything is going to help boost our immune systems, lift our moods, make us feel that life is worth living despite whatever other hardships and difficulties we have, it's that. Let alone for people who are living perhaps with people that they would not choose to live with, and previously that they would have had work to go to or space to be apart, and now are locked in with somebody not nice to be around 24/7.
But it's enough about people and their children.
Well, yeah, quite. But, I mean, just, I know from friends who work in women's refuges and in social care how immediately we knew that people were not going to be able to leave their homes very much, that the incidence of domestic abuse and violence was going to rise, people who are not able to control themselves. And, I just hope that everybody who needs help gets it. I know that's a vain and trite thing to say, really, but I just hope that everybody who needs help gets it. What else can we do?
And the other point you were making about, new beginnings and the like, it is a time when you are forced to take time out. You aren't at work, you're not in the normal daily grind.
Yep.
And it does give you an opportunity to sit back and think and take account of things that are really important in life and things that you've been on the treadmill and you're thinking, well, I can live without it now.
It's interesting. It's really shown, I think, without wanting to go down the route of, during this time I'm going to learn 2 languages, write a novel, exercise, get fit. I think there are realistic things and there are unrealistic things. And I think for a lot of people, just simply getting through the day and thinking, what are we going to eat tonight? I'm so sick of this, and and just feeling stir crazy. I don't want anyone to feel that they've wasted this time if they haven't lost 3 stone, become a triathlete, written a novel. I don't want anybody to feel that they've been, a failure during this time. I personally have no interest in exercise at the best of times. This has not created an interest.
Yes.
I have not been doing daily exercise. I have been saving my steps and not wanting to waste any. And but finally, after 4 weeks, I have gone into the upstairs room of doom, and I have started to move some things about. I went up for a 10-minute viewing one evening, and then I went up the next day in daylight for an hour or so and thought, oh, and shut the door again after an hour, but I'd moved a few things, and then I went up there a day or two later when it was a bit cloudy and miserable and I couldn't sit outside, and I spent nearly 7 hours with 1970s music cheering me up and keeping me going, and stacked things vertically to give myself some more floor to working, 'cause it's a very tiny room, and started to think, okay, what could I do here? No pressure, but what could I do? And I'm actually kind of getting into the swing of it. And I'm going to bed a little earlier, so I'm getting up a bit earlier. And before the sun hits the grass in my garden, I'm putting in an hour or so in that room. And I'm finding wonderful books that I knew I had but hadn't seen in a long time. And I'm kind of stacking and piling and sifting out. And I'm going to keep at it. And partly I'm thinking, if I'm in this house for, nearly 2 months, maybe more, and I haven't done this,
yes,
will I ever get such a time again?
Yes.
Don't want to kind of pile on the guilt stuff, but, for a long time, I've said to friends, well, I would tidy and tackle things in my house, which is, the clutter palace to end all clutter palaces. If I had, why would I ever have a protracted length of time in my house without disturbance? And of course, with the shop open, there's always something to distract. I'm processing orders, I'm sorting out paperwork, I'm answering emails. All of that shut down now. They're not ringing me as they generally do half a dozen times in the day when I'm at home. And the other days, I'm not in the shop. So suddenly there has been room to do it. But I didn't start it straight away. I wasn't trying to fill time.
Yeah.
For me, it's actually been lovely to think, I do not have to go anywhere today. I do not have to even speak today.
Yes.
I do not have to smile. I do not have to engage. I do not have to do anything at all other than breathe in and out and eat a little.
Yes.
And having done that for a while, I'm now feeling like, okay, I could do a little something.
Yes.
Not much, but something. It kind of took the pressure off.
Yes.
So again, I like the idea of this, of course, at this time is for that creative pull, but it doesn't have to feel like it's replacing one job with another. I should have said play. I should have said play in any way that seems good, because that's again very much fairy magic, is that it doesn't have to be with obvious purpose, with a perceived plan and projected result. It can just be to play.
Yes.
That frees you up from having to produce something, which is generally what work is.
Yes. As you're actually off the treadmill, don't create another treadmill for you to go on while you've got this time. Take advantage of it and look on the positive sides of it. Yes, there are a lot of negative sides and a lot of distressing sides, but this is a bonus.
difficulty, I think, for some that I've been emailing a lot. I have been messaging customers of mine that I know have mental health issues, suffer from anxiety, depression. Some are agoraphobic. Some are very fearful of the busy outside world. They have already been in a kind of mental and semi-physical lockdown for a long time. And so some of those people are feeling very weird because while everyone else is bleating on about, oh, I can't go to work and I can't go to the pub and I can't go to the hairdressing salon and I can't go to the cinema and I can't go to all the things I normally do and the busy has stopped. For them, life has hardly changed in some ways.
Interesting perspective, that, yes.
And they are also in trouble.
Yeah.
And having messaged maybe, 15, 20 people now who've got in touch with me or who I've messaged and just said, hello, you all right? How you doing? Just thought I'd say hello. I know it's weird. I'm the lady from the shop, but we've messaged before, so I just thought I'd say hello. And the response that I've had from quite a few of them is, I feel weird that my life isn't more different. All I'm reading online and on social media is how, oh my goodness, my life is so different, and my life isn't.
Yeah.
And that's weird for them.
Yes.
And feeling, that there's still disconnected from the rest of the human race because their life hasn't changed that much.
Yes.
But it's just become difficult to do some things. Some people who were not perhaps on vulnerable or housebound lists with their GP have now found it almost impossible to get online deliveries of food because they're not on the right list.
Yes.
Whereas before they relied upon that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's how long is this going to go on? Mid-May looks extremely unlikely and optimistic, I would say.
I would have thought so in the UK, yes, indeed.
Yeah. And, it's too bad if we hear that other countries are, relaxing their stringent restrictions. We are not in a position to do so. My parents went into, self-imposed isolation at the end of February.
Yeah.
Luckily, they adore each other and they have sufficient room to be able to be in different spaces so they don't have to gaze upon each other the whole time. My mum always used to say, since my dad retired, I married you for better, I married you for worse, but I didn't marry you for lunch every fucking day. Go away from me, be out of my sight and hearing, let me not be near you, and then that gives me a chance to miss you. And this is a line that I have trotted out to many people because we do need to miss people sometimes. And even if they can be one in the house, one in the garden, or one in downstairs, one upstairs, it just gives them a chance to be separate and then not resent the fact that they are pushed together, but they know how lucky they are to have that sufficiency of room. I have to say it's hard. It's hard for people.
Yes.
On we go.
On we go indeed.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Here's an odd little story, and we're talking about my favourite topic, me, and more to the point, a doppelganger I apparently once had. It was back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when I was a teenager still living in my own hometown of Scarborough, and one summer I began to hear reports, via my mother and my grandmother, that I'd apparently been snubbing some of their friends. The story was always the same. The friends saw me walking along a street towards them, and because they knew me, as I approached them, they said hello to me. Naturally enough, but instead of replying, I just walked on by and ignored them. How rude, as Jar Jar Binks would say. But it wasn't me. And I can be certain it wasn't me because on one instance I wasn't even in town that day but away at university. There was also an ex-girlfriend who said she'd seen me across a crowded dance floor at a disco I did not attend, and once again I ignored her. So it was either someone who looked very much like me or else my doppelganger. Now, I've never met this person in the flesh, and I've certainly never met my own doppelganger. And a good job too, as meeting your own doppelganger usually means you are going to die in the very near future. So what happened next? Well, nothing. The reports dried up. So my money is that my apparent double was someone who was temporarily in Scarborough for the summer. We used to get a lot of seasonal workers, and once the summer was over, he went back to wherever he came from. End of story. Or is it? Because there is a curious coda by way of a footnote to this story. The place where these encounters with my double occurred most frequently was on the Valley Bridge, which, as the name implies, is a large road bridge linking the town centre with the South Cliff district of the town. Now, shortly after these sightings of my double, the Valley Bridge became a suicide hotspot. This is a phenomenon whereby, thanks to previous media coverage of suicides, people make their way to a specific location to commit suicide. In the UK, Beachy Head, the Forth Road Bridge, the Humber Bridge and the London Underground are all hotspots, while in the US, Niagara Falls and the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge are the top suicide hotspots. But back to Scarborough. It should be noted that jumping off the Valley Bridge was always a fatal event. Unfortunately, as it passed over another main road, there was also a very real risk jumpers would also take out an innocent motorist driving beneath the Valley Bridge. For the record, extra tall safety railings were subsequently added to the bridge, and it no longer retains its ominous reputation as a suicide hotspot. Time now for a public service announcement. I have a new book out. It's called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England, and it's available now exclusively as an ebook on Amazon Kindle. So what's it about? Let me tell you. Although I've always enjoyed history, even the dull, dry stuff, and some of it can be drier than an Egyptian mummy's wrappings, what really intrigues me are those weird, almost surreal moments that leave you shaking your head in disbelief and wondering, whatever were they thinking? Such as the time King John of England sent an assassin armed with a poisoned boiled egg to kill an ex-girlfriend of his. Yes, you heard that correctly. The murder weapon was a poisoned boiled egg. You won't find that in Cluedo. Now, for this new book, and relax, it may be history, but it's a very short book, I've collected 5 tales taking us from the misty years following the collapse of the Roman Empire and its rule in England, a time when it's hard to distinguish between history, myth and legend, through until the arrival of the Normans when, after over 600 years of almost constant instability, some semblance of normality returned to English life. It's an era that's always fascinated me, precisely because of this blurring between the historical and the mythic, but also because there are so many incredible characters, normally woefully overlooked in history books, whose lives today wouldn't be out of place in reality TV shows and documentaries. As for the incidents they are involved with, well, truth really is stranger than fiction, even fiction as engrossing as the recent Game of Thrones and the Vikings series. And talking of the Vikings, one of my stories even involves Ragnar Lothbrok. Incidentally, you will have noticed I use the term Dark Ages to summarise the temporal scope of this book. This is the period from the early 5th century, with the departure of the Roman legions from the province of Britannia, through the Saxon period up until the end of the Viking Age and the arrival of the Normans in the 11th century. I appreciate most historians now prefer the term early Middle Ages or even early medieval period, but I personally think Dark Age more evocative and better sums up the dystopian chaos of a period of history when life for most people at all levels of society was nasty, brutish and short. So climb aboard as we set off to explore 5 of the more weird, obscure and basically what the fuck corners of English history. These are tales of murder, mayhem, treason, torture, incest and adultery, in which we'll encounter 9 saints, 8 English kings who met gruesome, bloody, premature deaths, 5 English queens whose antics would not be out of place today on the Mail Online sidebar of shame, and the mother of all wicked stepmothers. You can buy the book on all the main Amazon sites, including .com as well as .co.uk. It's called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. The author is me, Charles Christian, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can borrow it free of charge. What else can I say? It's a fun read. You'll enjoy it, especially if you like the weirder side of history, and I'm guessing you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this show. Time now for another of our fabulous creature stories, which I talk about mythical creatures of folklore and legend. And this time we're looking at one of the grossest, scariest and most disgusting creatures you might ever have the misfortune to encounter. Called the Nuckelavee, though it's spelt Nuckelavee, it's to be found in the Orkney Islands. These are the northernmost of Scotland's many island archipelagos. Given these islands' Celtic and Norse origins, the creature shares traits from both cultures' folklore. According to the 19th century folklorist Trail Dennison, the name means devil of the sea. And Dennison also interviewed an islander called Tamas, who claimed to have encountered the creature. Looking at the dates of Trail Dennison and when he was collecting these stories, Tamas would appear to have had his encounter during the first half of the 19th century, so something like about 200 years ago. Now, according to Tamas's description, the Nuckelavee was a cross between a giant horse and a centaur, but with the man's body growing out of the middle of the horse's back rather than at the front. The male torso had no legs, just grew out of the middle, as I said, but it did have very long arms that could reach the ground or stretch forward to reach its victims. Unlike the traditional centaur, the creature also had 2 heads. There was a human head atop the man's torso, a head about 3 feet in diameter that apparently rolled backwards and forwards like a hanged man with a broken neck. The second head was a giant horse head with an enormous gaping mouth like that of a whale, from which exuded its smelly toxic breath. The horse head also had a giant single bright red eye. It gets worse, because in a particularly gruesome detail, Tamas said the Nuckelavee had no skin, but instead its pale sinews and powerful muscles were visible as a pulsating mass of raw flesh, with bloody black blood coursing through yellow veins. According to Trail Dennison's studies, the Orkney Islands were so terrified of Nucklevees that would not even mention their name without immediately saying a prayer. And with good reason. The Nucklevee's putrid breath was said to wilt crops and sicken livestock. It was considered responsible for epidemics of plague and drought, and it would kill any person it encountered. So how did our eyewitness Tamas survive? Tamas met his Nuckelavee one night while he was walking along a track that was bounded by the sea on one side and by a freshwater loch or lake on the other. Now, Nucklevees are creatures of the ocean, living in salt water and reputed to hate fresh water so much, to the extent that if it was raining, they would never come ashore and just remain submerged in the sea. Also, in common with many other elemental creatures, Nucklevees cannot cross a stream or river of flowing fresh water. Tamas therefore placed one of his feet in the loch and splashed the Nuckelavee with fresh water. This caused the creature to bellow in rage and shy away from him. Taking advantage of the creature's temporary distraction, the Orkney Islander broke into a run and raced towards a small stream through which surplus fresh water from the loch overflowed into the sea. As he ran, he could hear the Nuckelavee galloping after him and the smell of its terrible breath growing ever closer, but he finally reached the bank of the stream and leapt to safety. But he only just made it to the far side, for as Tamas was leaping, he felt the creature's long arms make one final lunge for him, a lunge that managed to snatch the tartan bonnet off his head. As I said, a particularly gross and unpleasant creature, and I promise I'll have a cheerier, cuter creature for next time. So I spotted a comment the other day which said that you can even buy parts of the crown of thorns on eBay. And I thought, what? The crown of thorns? You know, the thing that Jesus was meant to wear when he went on his way to crucifixion, on eBay. So I checked it out, and no, you can't. But you can buy not parts of the crown of thorns, but a crown of thorns. They're described as genuine in the sense they're made of real thorns, and they probably come from Palestine and Israel, the area around Jerusalem, so if you like, the Holy Land. So they're real that way. Anyway, it got me thinking, what else can you find? So I had a little search around, and before we go any further, I think we need to look at how the Roman Catholic Church assesses relics. There's actually 3 categories: first class, second class, and third class. First class relics are items directly associated with the events of Christ's life. So that means parts of the manger, parts of the Holy Cross, crown of thorns, the stone staircase in Pontius Pilate's palace that he was made to walk up. The Vatican now has this and has recently reopened it for pilgrims. It needed restoring because so many people have kneeled on it over the centuries. It's worn away. And then the other category of first-class relics are the physical remains of saints. So hair, bones, skulls, limbs, the likes. The more famous the saint, the more valuable the relic, and martyrs' relics are more highly prized than relics of just saints who die in their beds. And the parts of the saint that were significant are also more highly prized. So King Stephen of Hungary, his right forearm is important because of his status as a ruler, ruled with his strong right arm. The head of St. Thomas Aquinas, he was a famous medieval theologian. His head is the most important part because that's obviously where the brain was, where he did all the thinking. And indeed, shortly after he died, the monks at the Cistercian Abbey, where he died, removed the head. And if you've got a saint who did a lot of travelling, and the bones of his feet might be more prized. Next up, second-class relics, something owned or used by a saint. So a silver crucifix, a rosary, a book, and again, items more important in the saint's life become more important as a relic. So if it's just, say, Mother Teresa's tennis shoes, that's not as important as, say, Mother Teresa's rosary. And finally, we've got third-class relics, and these are objects that have touched a first or second-class relic. Yeah, getting a bit confusing here. So pieces of fabric that allegedly have been kissed or used to wipe the brow of a saint, that's a third-class relic. There's even something called nails that have touched nails from the Holy Cross. I'm not quite sure how a nail touches a nail from the Holy Cross, but That's a touch nail, and that becomes a third-class relic. And indeed, one was on sale in New York a few years ago and sold for $1,800. Now, obviously, there is a huge ground for fraud with these, and indeed even in the Middle Ages there was a big issue with fraudulent relics. It was quite an industry because, I mean, let's face it, one piece of wood is very much like any other piece of wood. Calvin, the 16th century Protestant theologian, he once commented that there were enough pieces of the true cross going around the world that you could build Noah's Ark from it. So that is obviously an issue. There's also a thing called the, not quite sin, of simony. That's trading in relics, and the Catholic Church is very hot on this. So where do these things go on sale? Well, some do appear on eBay. Most of the ones I found on eBay UK have been third-class relics, pieces of fabric that supposedly have been touched or somehow connected with saints. But sometimes first-class relics crop up there. This is despite the fact that eBay has its policy that prohibits the sale of human body parts, so bits of bones from a saint really shouldn't be there. But there you go. Where money's involved, people can be a little bit insensitive. There's also specialist websites you can find now. I found a very intriguing one called RussianStore.com, which has a huge range of relics available. Some of them are clearly very pricey. Documented reliquary with important relic from the wood of the true cross of Jesus Christ. Now, it's worth noting that some of these splinters of the cross are so small you need a magnifying glass to see them. They've also got bone. They've got bone from the true head of St. John the Baptist. The true head relevancy being that there are several churches around the world that claim they've got the head of John the Baptist lurking there. Head of St. Thomas also is fairly well spread around the world. They've also got a relic from the veil of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Yeah, and a relic from the chemise. That's sort of really the vest or nightie of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and relics from the three wise men, the three kings. Getting down to prices, for $3,500 you can get a reliquary containing a relic of St. Mary Magdalena. Doesn't say what. There's another one here, or St. the Martyr and St. Agatha. Not sure who she is, but it's a bit of bone from her, $3,500. Relics of St. Anthony of Padua, $6,000. Reliquary here containing some of the blood of Jesus Christ, $5,500. So we say it's plenty of stuff out there. So I just thought I'd mention it. If you are interested in relics, you can buy them online. However, here's a little intriguing thought. There used to be, the report I've got several years old now, but it's about a dealer in New York that's been selling religious relics for decades, and she describes her typical customer as male, single, middle class and gay. Nope, that's her words. So there you go. And the prices soar from astronomical to relatively a low price. You can get a reliquary containing bits, I can only say it's bits, I think they're tiny little bones, of the patron saints of Milan, St. Ambrosius, St. Marcellina, and the martyrs St. Gervasus and St. Protestius. So 4 for the price of 1, and that's for a mere $475. And that's it. We're almost out of time again. But before I go, one final thought. I'm hearing a lot of people complaining that the world is going to hell in a handcart. And not just as a result of the impact of the coronavirus lockdown on everyday life and business. Climate change, pollution, surveillance technology watching our every move, social media pumping out fake news, twizzled-eyed multi-billionaires getting ever more rich and twizzled-eyed. Feel free to add your own bête noires to the list. The list of things is endless and it all boils down to the same sentiment. Everything is getting worse and there is no hope of stopping the decline. But this got me thinking, where does the phrase going to hell in a handcart come from? What are its origins? The big problem is none of my usual folklore reference sources can provide a definitive answer. And an added complication is there is a geographic divide. Here in the UK, we go to hell in a handcart, while over in the United States, the phrase tends to be going to hell in a handbasket. This can be traced back to at least the American Civil War, or the war between the states if you prefer, when people were complaining that the country was going to hell in a handbasket. One suggested explanation is that going to hell in a handcart derives from a time of the Great Plague in England that was in 1665 to 1666, when the dead would be collected and taken away for burial by two-wheeled carts that were either pulled or pushed by a couple of men. Although the plague victims would certainly be going into the afterlife in a handcart, it does seem a bit harsh to condemn them all to hell. Surely some of them will make it to heaven. But our story does not stop there, for in Fairford Church in Gloucestershire, England, the Great West Window, which was installed sometime before the year 1517 AD, depicts the Day of Judgment in stained glass, with the innocent going to heaven and the guilty going to hell. Among the latter, the guilty going to hell, is an old woman in a wheelbarrow being pushed to her doom by a blue-skinned devil. And a wheelbarrow is another form of handcart. So, that would seem to suggest that the concept of going to hell in a handcart dates back to at least 500 years ago, if not earlier. Anyway, if any of you have any bright ideas or thoughts or heard anything about it, I'd love to hear from you. Now it just remains for me, Charles Christian, to say thank you very much for listening in, and I'll hope you'll join me again same time next week. Till then, stay well, stay weird, stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.